Hello! On this unit, we will be looking at the urinary system. First, we will quickly review the parts of the urinary system, and then our major focus will be on a nephron, as an especially important structure that we ought to be familiar with by the end of this video. You might remember this diagram from the past. When we think of why to study urinary system, we find ourselves once again looking at these connections between various systems. So we saw how systems were interlinked, working together to enable us to turn sugars into energy and then getting rid of the waste products that resulted from this process. In this case, it's gonna be the excess hydrogen, and urinary system will play a major role in getting rid of it as part of this process. So let's review the major parts of the urinary system. This review will be only a brief one, as we will look at each of these in more detail a little later on. But one that is going to be very important for us to focus is the kidneys. They have a huge range of functions, and we will spend quite some time looking at these and how the kidneys actually work on a small scale level. For our purposes for now, we note that as a result of many of their functions, kidneys produce urine. We will also talk about the ureters, which transport this urine from the kidneys to the next structure called urinary bladder. And while there has been two kidneys, two ureters, we will only have one urinary bladder. And for the urinary bladder, probably one of the simpler ways to describe it is that it is simply just a storage site where the urine is kept until a time comes to release and excrete it from the body. And this connection from the urinary bladder to the outside world is, of course, through a urethra. And we have one of those. The length of the urethra varies a bit between sexes, and we will consider some of its consequences later. But for now, I think that it is a good overview of the urinary system for our purposes, orienting ourselves on what's to come. So, as I said, the kidneys have a huge range of functions. At large, we can consider this vast range of tasks as a result of kidneys' role in filtering blood. And this in turn then results in several jobs that the kidneys take care of. For example, to mention some of the most important ones, the kidneys regulate the fluid volume and the total solute concentration in the body fluids. In addition, they take care of the regulation of ion concentrations in the fluids outside the cells, known as ECF, extracellular fluid. In addition, kidneys play a crucial role in ensuring the maintenance of long-term acid-base balance. We discussed this in our introductory biology classes, and if you have forgotten this, I will add a link to the end of this video. Furthermore, kidneys play a key role in excretion of metabolic wastes, toxins, and drugs. So when you go out for a night on the town to relax, your kidneys won't be resting while you are. A couple of other important things that kidneys do that definitely need to be highlighted. are regulation of blood pressure via erythropoietin and regulation of red blood cell production via renin. And I added this too, as I do not want to forget the important role of kidneys in activating vitamin D. And also, if needed, the kidneys will carry out gluconeogenesis. So this is quite a list and only makes a start of covering the many functions of kidneys. So while these are the ones that I picked based on my view of importance, there are many others. But let's take a step back from the list of functions and cover a bit of gross anatomy of the kidneys. So, kidneys are often described as having a shape that resembles that of the shape of a bean. But of course bigger, but similar in shape. In fact, I believe that typically an adult kidney is in size something like 12 centimeters long, 6 centimeters wide, and 3 centimeters thick. So that gives you an idea about the size. And this shape of a bean gives rise to the concave medial surface, where we will find the renal hilum. Internally at this area, we have the renal sinus inside the kidney. And I think that that is shown even in this figure that I included. The reason why I wanted to highlight this is that at the hilum is where the ureters, renal blood vessels, lymphatics, and nerve vessels enter and exit to the kidney. And of course, at the lateral surface then is convex. And of course, I want to mention that the kidneys are reddish brown in color. One final point that I want to make is that the kidneys appear on a gross anatomy level to have a smooth surface. This is because they are enclosed in a fibrous renal capsule. And the kidneys are anchored to the peritoneum and abdominal wall by fascia. Thinking of dissecting a kidney, these are often surrounded by a capsule of internal fat which protects these. What I just said about the anchoring of the kidney gives us also a clue of the kidney's location. They are much further back towards your back than people often think of. So they are retroperitoneal organ, behind the peritoneum. And we talked about the peritoneum in our video of the abdominal organs. I will add a link to that as well to the end of this video. We also notice that when comparing the left and right side of the body, the left kidney is typically higher, while the right one is lower. Why would this be the case? Can you propose an explanation based on all that you know about the human body? Well, the answer is, of course, in the fact that the liver is largely located on the right side, above the kidney, and therefore the kidney on this side ends up being a little lower. And this leads us to look just briefly one clinical condition that I wanted to mention. In renal tutosis, one or both of the kidneys drop lower than normal. And this may result from the loss of fatty tissue capsule that surrounds the kidneys and holds them in their normal position. This can sometimes be seen as a consequence of someone dropping weight very fast. The consequence can be quite problematic. As a result, the ureter may become kinked, causing urine to back up and exert pressure on the kidney tissue. And let's consider this a little further. This backing up of the urine can cause severe damage to the kidney, leading to the tissue death and eventually to the renal failure. Now, let's look at the internal anatomy of the kidney. There are three main regions that we will want to note. Cortex is this granule appearing superficial region. Medulla then is deep to this and composed of cone-shaped medullary pyramids. These are sometimes called also as renal pyramids, so don't let that confuse you. If you see these terms sometimes being used interchangeably. Notice on this diagram how the broad base of the pyramid faces the cortex, while the tip of the pyramid, known as papilla, points internally. Then these renal pyramids are separated by renal columns, which are inwards expansions of the cortical tissue. And then one more term that we need to know. Lobe refers to the medullary pyramid and its surrounding cortical tissue. So if we try to put these structures together from this and our earlier slides, there is a nice list of flow of urine there for you too. Now, let's shift our focus on much smaller scale. And we will have a look of a structure called nephron. These are functional and structural units of the kidney, and they are responsible for forming the urine. In a healthy adult, we would typically see somewhere around about 0.8 to 1.5 million nephrons per kidney. And using this diagram, let's review the main parts of a nephron. So, first of all, we have blood coming in and leaving the nephron. So, the vessel bringing in the blood is known as afferent, and the one leaving is efferent. Please note that there is no real loss or gain of oxygen here. I just included the color to highlight the difference between these two. And within the nephron, this blood vessel makes a capillary bed known as the glomerulus. This is a tuft of capillaries composed of fenestrated epithelium with highly porous capillaries. And the Bowman's capsule, or sometimes it is called glomerular capsule, is a cup-like sac around this. This encloses the glomerulus inside it. And here we see this filtration process producing something called filtrate. Then arising from the Bowman's capsule, we have proximal convoluted tubule. Note the name part, proximal. This is closer to the renal capsule. And now we have a nephron loop, which is sometimes also known as the loop of Henle. This is a U-shaped structure that consists of two limbs, descending and ascending limb. During the descending limb, there is some reabsorption. So some of the material that we have taken into the nephron as a filtrate, now some of it gets returned back to the blood. And during ascending limb, some of the opposite happens. This is known as secretion. Secretion phase in a nephron loop means that some content from the blood gets put back into the nephron. And now we can have a look of the distal convoluted tubule. Here we are further away from the renal capsule, so therefore the term distal. And it is also noteworthy to point out that the wall structure of this area becomes especially important when certain hormones play a role. But we will have a look at that a little later. The final structure from here that I want to highlight is called collecting duct. This is where now urine is excreted from the nephron. So, I know that it was a lot of terms, but really when we put it all together, it becomes more manageable, I think. Just tackle them one by one and following the path of materials passing through. And now, I want to draw our attention to these colorful arrows, which are used to symbolize the fluid movement that takes place at each of these sites. So I have mentioned these just briefly, but when we put it all together, we notice that there is a lot of movement to and out from the nephron. So this is why nephron is so delicately and elegantly designed structure. And now we get to the clinical stuff as it relates to the nephron. Glomerular filtration rate is used in clinical practice to quantify how much blood flows through the glomeruli in a minute. Basically, what it tells us is that how well the kidneys are working. And in medical field, you will often see this abbreviated as GFR. And looking at that number may be pretty important. Now, I mentioned earlier that there is a hormone that I need to introduce here. ADH, an abbreviation which stands for antidiuretic hormone. This is a hormone that reduces the amount of urine produced by the nephrons. And it acts on the distal convoluted tubule. Especially. The presence of the ADH changes the wall of the distal convoluted tubule more permeable, which results in more fluid being recovered back to the circulation from the nephron. So, as a net result, less urine is being produced. So with that, we are going to wrap up our discussion on the kidney. In the next video, we will briefly look at the other parts of the urinary system.